Right now, you are some number of years old. Doesn't matter exactly how many. What matters is that whoever you are, you have lived more than 15,000 days. So let's do something with one of them. Pick a day, not a famous one, not a wedding, not a funeral, not the day something broke. A random Tuesday from 9 years ago, an ordinary one. You woke up that morning, light came through a window, you ate something, you said words to someone, and some of those words probably mattered to them more than you'll ever know. A whole day, 24 hours of being alive, being you, fully present, with no idea it would be the day I'd one day ask you to find. Now find it. You can't. And I want you to notice the exact texture of why you can't, because it's stranger than it first seems. It's not that the day is blurry. Blurry would mean it's still there, just out of focus, like a photo you could maybe sharpen if you tried hard enough. No, the day is gone.
It happened. It was real. It was as vivid and immediate to you then as this moment is to you now. And it has left no trace anywhere in the universe. Because the only place that day was ever stored was inside your head. And your head let it go. Sit with the scale of that for a second, because most people never do. The overwhelming majority of your own life has already vanished. Not misplaced, not forgotten in the soft, recoverable, oh, it'll come to me sense. Deleted. If you tried right now to account for your existence day by day, you would find that you are, statistically, almost a complete stranger to the person who has been living your life. And here's where it gets worse. The tiny sliver you think you kept, your most precious memories, the handful of scenes you would point to and say, this is who I am. Those are not recordings. I know they feel like recordings. They feel like little films you can play back. They are not. They are reconstructions. Your brain builds them again from raw parts every single time you remember them, and every rebuild quietly edits the one before it. Which means some of your most cherished memories did not happen the way you remember them. And a few of them, may not have happened at all. But the strangest part is the beginning, the first years of your life, the years that actually built the person sitting here watching this, the years where you learned that you were a self, separate from the world, loved or not loved, safe or not safe. You remember none of it. None. And for about 100 years, science had a tidy, comforting explanation for that. The baby brain, they said, is simply too primitive to record. There's nothing to retrieve because nothing was ever written down. In 2025, that explanation died. We now know that your infant brain was recording. Researchers can watch the recordings light up.
The footage of you as a 1-year-old, held, fed, frightened, comforted, may, physically, still be in there. You just can't get to it. This video is about the locked room at the center of you. And I should warn you now, before we start walking toward it, that this is not really a video about how memory works. There are 1,000 of those, and they are mostly boring, because they treat your memory like a piece of office equipment with some quirks. This is a video about whether the continuous person you've believed yourself to be your whole life, the one stretching back, unbroken, all the way to childhood, is actually there at all. I went into this thinking it was a science story. I came out the other side genuinely unsettled about my own existence. So, fair warning, let's go. I need to tell you where this started for me, because it would be dishonest to pretend I figured any of this out myself. I am not a neuroscientist.
I'm a person who read a book and fell down a hole. The book is called Pieces of Light, and it's by a writer named Charles Fernyhough, who is, conveniently, both a novelist and a psychologist, which turns out to be the perfect combination of credentials for this particular subject, and you'll see why in a minute. The book has a subtitle, Something About How the New Science of Memory Illuminates the Stories We Tell About Our Pasts. And honestly, the subtitle is the whole thesis, so hold on to that word, stories. I'll be straight with you. I didn't agree with everything in it, and there are stretches where Fernyhough gets very literary at exactly the moment I wanted him to get very precise. And I'd find myself going, okay, beautiful sentence, but what is the experiment? That's a me problem more than a him problem. Because the core idea of the book is one of those ideas that, once it gets into you, you cannot get back out. And the idea is this: to remember is to rebuild.
And to rebuild is, partly, always, to invent. Not sometimes. Not when you're tired or lying. Always. The act of remembering is itself an act of construction. There is no playback button in your skull. There never was. The film you think you're watching when you remember your 10th birthday is being assembled, live, on demand, out of fragments, and stitched together with educated guesses, and then, this is the part that should bother you, it gets filed back into storage as if the freshly assembled version were the original. Every recall overwrites. Fernyhough builds his case slowly, through case studies and his own memories, and a lot of careful, humane thinking about what it means to have a past. But while I was sitting with his book, the science underneath it was quietly detonating. And the explosion that went off in 2025 turned out to drop directly onto the foundation he'd laid. So I'm going to braid the two together.
The Patient, literary truth about memory as story, and the brand new, almost science fiction discovery about what's hiding in the part of memory we all assumed was empty. Let's start with how much is gone, because we need to feel the size of the loss before any of the rest of it lands. There's a man you should know about, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus, working in the 1880s, who did something almost monastic in its loneliness. He decided to study memory by becoming his own laboratory rat. He invented thousands of nonsense syllables, meaningless little three-letter clusters with no association to anything, and he memorized lists of them. And then he tested himself, again and again, over hours, days, weeks, to measure exactly how fast they leaked back out of him. What he found is now called the forgetting curve, and it is brutal. The forgetting isn't slow and gentle. It's a cliff. You lose the steepest portion almost immediately, much of it within the first hour, a great deal more within the first day. And then the curve flattens into a long, slow tail. Most of what your brain decides not to keep, it dumps almost at once. Now, Ebbinghaus was memorizing nonsense, detached fragments. And you might say, fine, that's nonsense syllables. My life is not nonsense syllables. My life is meaningful. My life is full of vivid emotional events that surely stick. So let's test that. Here's the first thought experiment, and I want you to actually do it, not just nod along, because nodding along is how people protect themselves from how strange this is. Try to list, right now, genuinely distinct, datable episodes from your own life. Not categories. Not, summers were nice. Not, we used to go to my grandmother's. Specific scenes. A particular afternoon, in a particular place, that you could, in principle, locate on a calendar. Start counting them. I'll give you a few seconds. Here's what happens to almost everyone who tries this honestly. You get the obvious peaks fast. The wedding, the accident, the trip, the loss. And then you slow down. And then, somewhere shockingly early, you run dry. Most people asked to do this hit a wall after a few hundred truly distinct memories. A few hundred. Out of 15,000 days. Out of 1/3 of a million waking hours. Remember that number you hit. The wall. We're going to come back to it, and when we do, it's going to mean something different than it does right now. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. You do not have a life of memories. You have a highlight reel. A few hundred clips long. And the disturbing implication, the one Fernyhough circles all through his book, is that the reel is not the same thing as the life. The life was the 15,000 days. The reel is what survived. And you have quietly, without ever deciding to, started mistaking the reel for the thing itself. When you say my life, you mean the trailer. The movie's gone. Huh. Okay, so that's the loss across the whole span, but there's one region of the loss that's total, absolute. A blackout, not a fade. And that's the beginning. You cannot remember being a baby. You almost certainly cannot remember anything before the age of 2, and your memories before 3 or 4 are thin, patchy, and, we'll get to this, frequently fake. This phenomenon has a name. It's called infantile amnesia, and the person who named it was Sigmund Freud, over a century ago, who found it genuinely remarkable that we draw a total blank over the years in which, as he put it, we were most intensely alive. The years of the most rapid learning of your entire existence. The years you acquired a language from nothing. The years your personality was, in large part, set. All of it, black. For a century, the explanation was mechanical, and it was tidy, and almost everyone believed it. The story went like this. The hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure deep in your brain that is essential for forming new, long-term episodic memories, is not finished cooking at birth. It's immature. It's still wiring itself up. And so the baby, the argument went, simply cannot lay down lasting episodic memories at all. There's nothing to retrieve in adulthood because nothing was ever written. The tape was never running. The room is empty because nobody ever furnished it. I need you to hold that explanation in your mind right now. And I need you to hold it as if it's true. Because for most of the time you've been alive, the experts held it as true. The room is empty. Nothing was recorded. Got it? Good. Because I'm building a trap door under your feet. And that sentence is the floor. To open the trapdoor, we have to leave humans for a minute and talk about mice. Specifically about a piece of work out of a lab in Toronto by a researcher named Axel Guskjolen, working with the neuroscientist Paul Frankland, published in 2018. And to understand what they did, you need one piece of vocabulary, and it's a beautiful one. The engram. An engram is the physical trace of a single memory. The idea is old. It goes back a century to a German scientist named Richard Semon, who basically got laughed out of the room for proposing that a specific memory might live in a specific physical pattern of cells. For decades, it was almost mystical. The engram, the holy grail, the actual location of a memory in matter. And then, in the last 15 years or so, optogenetics happened. A technique where you genetically engineer neurons so they can be switched on and off with pulses of light, like little biological light switches. and suddenly the engram stopped being a metaphor and became a thing you could point a laser at.
So here's what the Toronto group did, and I want to walk through it slowly because the logic is the whole game. They took infant mice. Baby mice have their own version of infantile amnesia. They form a memory and then days later behave as if it's completely gone, just like us. So the team gave young mice an experience, a specific event in a specific place. And at the exact moment that memory was being formed, they chemically tagged the precise neurons that lit up to encode it. They marked the engram. They put a flag on the specific cells that were the memory. Then they waited. They let the mice grow up a little until the memory was, by every behavioral measure, gone, forgotten. The mice acted like the event had never happened. Infantile amnesia, right on schedule. By the old theory, those cells should hold nothing, because nothing durable was ever written. And then they switched the tagged neurons back on, with light. The memory came back.
The mice behaved again as if they remembered. The supposedly erased, supposedly never recorded infant memory was sitting right there the whole time, intact enough that a pulse of light could summon it. It had never been deleted. It had been filed. The footage existed. What the animal lacked was not the recording. What it lacked was the ability to find it. The infantile amnesia wasn't a failure of the tape. It was a failure of the search. Think about what that does to the tidy old story. The room was not empty. The room was full. There was just no handle on the door. Imagine a vast archive, every shelf stocked, every box labeled in a language the librarian has forgotten how to read. Nothing is missing. Everything is lost. That is your infancy, at least in a mouse. And of course, the immediate screaming objection, and you should be making it, I made it, is, that's a mouse. A mouse is not a person. A mouse memory of a place is not your memory of your mother's face. You cannot put a 1-year-old human in a machine, tag its neurons, and shine lasers into its brain, for a long list of extremely good reasons. So this was a gorgeous, suggestive result that lived behind a wall. It hinted that human infant memories might also be recorded but locked, rather than never recorded. But hinted is all it could do. That wall came down in 2025. And this is where it gets really strange. So pay close attention to this next part. Because the difficulty of what these people pulled off is half the story. A team at Yale, led by a neuroscientist named Nick Turk Brown, with a researcher named Tristan Yates as first author, published their result in the journal Science. And before I even tell you what they found, I have to tell you what they did, because it sounds impossible. They scanned the brains of awake infants inside an fMRI machine. If you've never been in an MRI, let me anchor this for you. It is a coffin-sized tube. It is monstrously loud, a relentless industrial hammering. And to get a usable image, the subject has to hold extraordinarily still. Adults find this difficult. Now picture getting a usable brain scan out of a conscious, unsedated baby who cannot be told why it's there, cannot be asked to stop wriggling, and is being asked to do a memory task at the same time. For years, this was considered close to undoable. They figured out how to do it. That alone is one of those quiet feats of method that the public never hears about. And here's the task.
They showed infants images, faces, objects, scenes. Later, they showed those images again alongside brand new ones. And there's a well-established truth about how babies look at the world. Babies stare longer at things that are new to them. A baby's gaze, lingering on one image over another, is a measurable signal that the baby finds it familiar or unfamiliar. So the looking behavior gives you a behavioral readout of memory in a creature that cannot speak. Now the punchline. When they looked back at the brain scans, they found that the amount of hippocampal activity at the moment a baby first saw an image predicted whether that baby would later treat the image as familiar. More activity in the hippocampus during encoding meant better memory afterward. The very structure everyone said was too immature to record episodic memories was recording episodic memories, and it was doing it from around the age of 1. The 100-year-old explanation, the room is empty, the tape was never running, is, as of 2025, dead. The infant hippocampus encodes genuine memories. The machinery is online. It is online during precisely the years that get wiped from your adult autobiography. Which forces the question that the old theory let everyone avoid. If the memories were encoded, and infantile amnesia is a retrieval failure rather than a recording failure, then where do those memories go? And the honest answer the researchers themselves are willing to entertain is the one that should make you put down whatever you're holding. Turp Brown is openly described chasing what he calls a radical, almost science fiction possibility. That these earliest memories don't get destroyed at all, that they persist in some dormant, encoded form into adulthood. Inaccessible, but there. Let that settle. Somewhere in the physical matter of your skull, right now, 3 inches behind your eyes, there may sit the encoded trace of the first time your mother held you. The first face you ever loved. The first time you felt safe, or didn't. A real memory, physically present, that you will go your entire life unable to open. You are, in the most literal sense, the output of experiences you can no longer access. The room is full. There's no handle on the door. And look, if a sentence like that is the kind of thing that's going to keep you up tonight, then sticking around this channel is probably a good move, because where we go next is stranger than the locked room. The channel only exists because enough people decided this exact flavor of unease was worth more of their evening. So if this is your kind of rabbit hole, subscribe, and let's keep going. Quietly. Because I haven't told you the worst part yet. The worst part isn't the room you can't get into. The worst part is what's been happening in the rooms you can. Here is the turn. This is the moment where I have to confess that everything I've said so far was a setup, and the real subject of this video has been hiding behind it the whole time. We've been treating infantile amnesia like a special case, a weird quirk of the baby brain. Locked footage, no handle, a strange exception at the start of life.
And it's tempting to file it away like that and feel okay, because at least the memories you can reach are solid. At least your 10th birthday is real. At least the version of your father's voice you carry is accurate, right? No. This is the trap door, and it just opened, and we're falling through it. Remember Fernyhough's thesis from the start. To remember is to rebuild, and to rebuild is to invent. The locked room of infancy is not the exception to how memory works. It is just the most visible, most total version of something that is happening to all of your memories, all the time. Because here's the mechanism, and it has a name: reconsolidation. For a long time, the assumption was that a memory, once consolidated, once written to long-term storage, was basically a finished file. Stable. You could read it without changing it, the way reading a book doesn't rewrite the book. Then a series of experiments showed something that overturned that completely.
When you retrieve a memory, you don't read it. You unlock it. You make it briefly editable again. And then, when you're done, it has to be resaved, reconsolidated. And in that window between recall and resaving, the memory is soft. It can be altered. It can absorb new information, present emotion, suggestion. And then the altered version gets written back as if it were the original. Read that again and feel the horror of it. The act of remembering something is the act of editing it. The memories you revisit most, the ones most precious to you, the ones you've replayed 1,000 times, are, by that very logic, the most heavily overwritten. They are the furthest from the original. The memory of your wedding day that you've lovingly taken out and looked at every year is a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Your most cherished memories are your least accurate ones.
And if you want to know how far this can go, you go to the work of one of the most important and most controversial psychologists alive, Elizabeth Loftus. Loftus spent a career proving something that sounds like an insult and turns out to be a law of nature. Human memory is not just unreliable, it is implantable. You can put a memory into someone's head of an event that never happened, and they will not be able to tell the difference. They will, in fact, defend the false memory with the same confidence, the same emotion, the same vividness as a true one. Her early work showed what's called the misinformation effect. She'd show people footage of a car accident, then ask them about it using subtly different words. How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other versus when they hit each other? The word smashed didn't just produce higher speed estimates. A week later, people who'd heard smashed were more likely to remember broken glass at the scene.
There was no broken glass. The question had rewritten the memory. A single verb edited the past. But the study that should genuinely disturb you is the one informally known as lost in the mall. Loftus and her colleagues planted in adult subjects a complete childhood memory of being lost in a shopping mall around the age of 5, frightened, crying, eventually rescued by an elderly stranger. None of it had happened. They confirmed that with the subjects' own families. And a significant fraction of people not only came to believe it, they elaborated on it. They added details. They described the stranger. They described their own fear. They supplied the texture, the sensory richness, the emotional truth for an event that was wholesale fiction, gently suggested to them by a researcher. Now hold that against the locked infant room and watch the two halves of this video click together. On one side, you have real memories you cannot access. On the other, you have fake memories you cannot distinguish from real ones. Your past, the actual record of who you were, is partly sealed away, where you'll never reach it, and partly invented and filed under true. The rooms you can't enter are full. The rooms you can enter have been redecorated, repeatedly, by an interior designer you never hired and cannot fire. And before you tell yourself this is some modern, fragile brain phenomenon, it isn't. The foundational demonstration is from 1932, from a British psychologist named Frederick Bartlett, who had people read an unfamiliar Native American folktale. He used one called The War of the Ghosts, full of imagery and logic alien to his English subjects, and then asked them to recall it, over and over, across weeks and months. They did not forget it randomly. They reshaped it. They smoothed out the parts that didn't fit their expectations. They dropped the supernatural elements that made no sense to them.
They rationalized the strange into the familiar. By the end, the story they remembered was a story their own culture could have written. They had, without any awareness of doing it, rebuilt the tale in their own image. Bartlett's word for what memory does was reconstruction. In 1932, we've known for nearly a century, we just don't like to look at it. So where does this leave you? It leaves you with a question that is no longer about neuroscience at all. And this is the second turn, the deeper one. Because if your memories are mostly gone, and the survivors are partly invented, then we have to ask, what is the thing that's doing the keeping? Who is the editor? Who decides which few hundred clips make the reel? For that, we cross into a completely different field, behavioral economics, and the work of Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won a Nobel Prize in economics, which tells you something about how far his ideas reached. And Kahneman draws a distinction that once you see it, you cannot unsee, and it will quietly reorganize how you think about your entire life. He says there are two selves living inside you. There's the experiencing self. That's the one who is actually alive right now in this minute. The one feeling the chair under you, hearing my voice, existing in the present tense. The experiencing self lives in a series of present moments, each lasting a few seconds, and then they're gone. The experiencing self is the one who does almost all of your actual living. And it has almost no power because it has no voice in memory. It doesn't get a say in the record. It lives and then it vanishes, moment after moment after moment, completely unrepresented. And then there's the remembering self, the storyteller, the one who keeps score, who decides what your vacation was like, what your relationship was like, what your life was like. And the remembering self is a terrible, biased historian.
Kahneman showed it follows a rule he called peak end. When you remember an experience, you do not average all the moments. You remember the most intense moment, the peak, and you remember how it ended. And that's basically it. The duration barely registers, a phenomenon so reliable he called it duration neglect. He demonstrated this in ways that are almost cruel in their cleverness. In one set of studies with colonoscopy patients, back when the procedure was far less comfortable than it is now, he found that a patient whose procedure was longer but ended on a milder note remembered the whole thing as less bad than a patient whose procedure was shorter but ended at a sharp peak of discomfort. More total suffering remembered as less. Because the ending was gentler. The remembering self does not care how much you actually suffered. It cares how the story finished. And here is the gut punch, the place where this stops being an interesting fact and starts being about your life.
You do not make your decisions for the self who experiences your life. You make them for the self who remembers it. You choose the vacation that will make the better story, not the one that will feel better minute to minute. People will endure a worse experience for a better memory of it. We are, all of us, constantly sacrificing the experiencing self, the one who's actually alive, on the altar of the remembering self, a narrator who keeps only peaks and endings and gets most of the details wrong. Imagine an alien researcher studying us. It watches a human being choose, again and again, the path that produces more total discomfort in lived seconds for the sake of a cleaner highlight in a reel that will itself mostly evaporate. The alien would conclude, reasonably, that we do not value our own lives. We value the trailer. We are willing to make the living worse to make the story better. And the punchline the alien would have to add, the story isn't even accurate.
So let's pull all of it into one place, because this is the synthesis, and it's where the science finally tips over into something I can only call philosophy. Run the chain. Most of your life is gone, deleted, not stored. The fraction you kept is reconstructed every time you touch it, and edited a little more each time. Some of what you kept is outright fabricated and indistinguishable from the real. The earliest, most formative part is locked in a room with no handle, and the editor in charge of the whole archive is a biased narrator who keeps peaks and endings and throws away the rest of the minutes you actually lived. Now here's the bomb. A psychiatrist named Veronica O'Keefe wrote a book, The Rag and Bone Shop, a title she borrowed from a Yeats poem about where all the ladders of the heart start. And her central argument is that memory does not just describe the self. Memory makes the self.
There is no separate, solid you sitting behind your memories, owning them, the way you own a photo album. You are the album, the continuous person you feel yourself to be, the through line connecting the baby in the photographs to whoever is watching this. That continuity is built out of memory and nothing else. And the philosophers got here centuries before the neuroscientists, which I find both humbling and a little funny. John Locke, back in the 1600s, argued that personal identity just is continuity of memory. That what makes you the same person as the child you were is the chain of remembering that links you back to them. Which raises a problem he didn't have the science to see the full size of. If that chain is mostly broken, and the surviving links are partly forged, then in what sense are you the same person as that child?
The philosopher Derek Parfit pushed this until it broke,
arguing that personal identity might not be the deep, all-or-nothing fact we feel it to be. That the you of decades ago and the you of now might be connected more like a rope of overlapping fibers than a single unbroken thread, with no fiber running the whole length. And Daniel Dennett gave it the phrase that haunts me most. The self, he said, is a center of narrative gravity. Not a thing, a point that a story revolves around. A useful fiction the brain spins because a creature that tells a coherent story about itself survives better than one that doesn't. There's a piece of vocabulary from the great memory scientist Endel Tolving that makes this exact. He distinguished knowing a fact about your past from reliving it. And he had a name for that reliving, that sense of mentally traveling back in time and being there again. He called it autonoetic consciousness. It is the thing that makes a memory feel like yours, rather than like a fact in a book. It is, arguably, the deepest signature of selfhood we have. And it is precisely the thing that is constructed, fallible, editable, and, for your first years, missing entirely. So put the pieces down on the table and look at them. If the self is made of memory, and memory is mostly gone, partly invented, and sealed at the source, then the continuous I you have carried your entire life, the one that feels more solid and certain than anything else in your experience, is a story. A curated, edited, partly fictional story, written by an unreliable narrator, about a person most of whose life has been erased. And yet it is also the realest thing you possess. This is the part I genuinely could not resolve.
and I've stopped trying to. Because the story isn't a lie sitting on top of the real you. There is no real you underneath it. The story is you. It's all there is. The fiction is the fact. Which flips the whole thing one final time. We started by treating forgetting as a tragedy, the great deletion, the lost days, the locked room. But look again. If you remembered everything, every Tuesday, every commute, every meal, all 15,000 days in full, equal, unedited detail, you would not be more yourself. You would be no self at all. You'd be a flat, undifferentiated archive with no shape, no meaning, no narrative. It's the forgetting that creates the shape. It's the editing that makes the story. The peaks and endings your unreliable narrator keeps, those aren't the corruption of your life. They're the authorship of it. Forgetting isn't a flaw in the story of your life. Forgetting is how the story gets written. Remember that wall I asked you to hit near the start? The point where you ran dry listing your real, distinct memories? A few hundred out of 15,000 days? I told you we'd come back to it, and it would mean something different. Here's what it means now. That small pile of clips is not the failure of your memory. It's the finished manuscript. That's the book. That's the whole self, right there. A few hundred pages long, edited down from a life that was thousands of times larger. Everything else was raw footage on the cutting room floor. And the cutting is what made it a film. I find that almost unbearably sad and almost unbearably beautiful in the same breath. And I've decided to just let it be both. Let me leave you where this left me. 2 images, and then I'll get out of your way. The first. Somewhere in the physical matter of your skull, there may sit, encoded and intact, the memory of the first time a person you loved held you. The Yale work and the mouse work together raise the genuine, no longer science fiction possibility that it's still in there. And they raise a question we are going to have to answer this century, not in theory, but in a lab. If those memories physically persist, could we one day build a key to that door? And the harder question, the one underneath it, if we could, should we? What would it do to you to suddenly retrieve, in full, the experiences that built you before you had any defenses, any words, any self to protect itself? There may be a very good reason the door has no handle. The forgetting might be mercy. We don't know. We're about to find out. And the second image, the one I actually can't shake. The day you are living right now, this exact one, this ordinary Wednesday or Tuesday or whatever it is, the one you're spending partly watching a video about memory, this day is already on its way to joining the deleted majority. By this time next year, almost none of it will have survived. The light in the room, the specific weight of how you feel right now, the precise texture of this minute, gone, almost all of it, recoverable by no one, stored nowhere. The only version that will last